Welcome to All About Capital Campaigns, a podcast that provides fuel for your nonprofit's growth. Each week, hosts Andrea Kilstedt and Amy Eisenstein, co-founders of the Capital Campaign Toolkit, provide practical tips about raising more money for your nonprofit organization. The Capital Campaign Toolkit is a support system for nonprofit leaders who are running capital campaigns. At capitalcampaigntoolkit.com, you can download a step-by-step guide for your capital campaign and get many other free resources. This podcast is recorded on a live webinar every Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can join the live session and get your questions answered by signing up today at toolkittalks.com.
This is mid-August, and fall's not very far away. September's not very far away. And in a bunch of your fundraising, particularly if you're doing capital campaigns, but in your annual fundraising, in your fall appeal fundraising, you may well want to recruit some volunteers to help. Right? We at the Toolkit believe in engaging people, engaging volunteers. We don't just do it because it creates more work for you. We don't encourage you to do it for that reason. We encourage you to do it because there is no question that when people are engaged in your organization, when they are helping you in some way, they become better donors. They help in all kinds of ways. They become closer to you. They become more interested in your organization. So it is by and large worth going to the time and trouble, and sometimes it is trouble, to engage donors. And we thought we would talk a little today about how to think about doing that, how to use the next couple of weeks to reach out to some of the people who might be great volunteers for you in the fall as your fundraising gets going. And how do you do that in a way that's likely to work? There are some sort of key principles about recruiting volunteers that we think it's worth talking about. Amy, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I think I'll start with some examples. And, for those of you who have been fundraising for a while, I'm sure you've both seen incredible success with fundraising volunteers and incredible frustration. Certainly, those are both true. And so the question is how to see more success and little less frustration. To me, that's the key. But the fact is that over the 20 plus years that I've been in fundraising, every time board members are involved with fundraising, the organization raises more money, full stop. Right? It doesn't matter if it's an annual campaign or a capital campaign or a special campaign. When board members are engaged in the process, the organization raises more money than if they weren't engaged. And so the question is how to get the benefits to outweigh the frustrations. And I think sometimes organizations do give up and just say, you know what, let the staff do it. It's too much trouble to involve our volunteers. They're not helping. So to me, the question is, how do we engage volunteers effectively so that they really do add value and feel valued and want to engage? So, feel free to put some suggestions and what's worked for you in the chat. This is what this is all about. It's community participation. So if you have great examples, but I'm going to give just a couple. So one is, first of all, I want to remind you that asking for money is not the only way that board members or volunteers can or should be engaged in the fundraising process. There are lots of components of the fundraising process that don't have to do with asking, because really when we see pushback from volunteers who don't want to quote unquote raise money, what they're really talking about most frequently is that they don't want to ask. And so to me, the easiest way to get board members engaged with fundraising is to get them to help with the thank you process, right? Sometimes that's a great role for board members, and it really does add a lot of value, whether they're making phone calls or writing notes. But one of the best examples that I have is during a board retreat, we had a whole room full of board members who really hadn't been involved in fundraising before. And we had asked them for 3 names of people that they would be willing to send letters to prior to the board meeting. So we had pre-addressed some appeal letters and envelopes. And at the board meeting, we just asked them to write a few sentences on the letter about why the organization was important to them. And we sent it off to their friends. And one board member who had never wanted to do any fundraising or never wanted to help or participate, one of his 3 friends sent back a check for $10,000. And he couldn't believe how easy it was. I mean, listen, does that always happen? No. But it was so simple and so effective. And then right? He was involved. He was involved from then on. He said, oh, I can fundraise. I didn't know I could fundraise. I've had this success. All I did was spend 5 minutes and here we go. So Andrea, why don't you talk about how you engage board members in campaigns, because it is so effective.
Yeah. So I've long believed that one of the things that makes capital campaigns such an amazing way to raise a whole lot of money is because if they're done right, you work with a bunch of ad hoc committees, of small committees that are set up to with very specific tasks that have beginnings and middles and ends, sometimes just 2 or 3 meetings to accomplish what they're done. And then the group is disbanded. And then they might come back. People might be asked to come back and help with something else. So, for example, you might have a small group to help with reading and editing and giving feedback about your draft case for support. Just 2 or 3 meetings, right? Where you send them a draft, you get them to respond to it, you send them another draft, you pull them together for a meeting, right? It just that, getting people's input on something, right? And then it's done. Once the draft is in pretty good shape, it's done. You might have a small group working on the feasibility study, sort of overseeing the feasibility study. They come together 3 times, perhaps over 3 months, something like that. And then their job is done. You might have them serve on a campaign planning committee or a campaign steering committee or the campaign event, the kickoff event planning committee or multiple other things, right? And each time you have a group of people that actually you work with them, and then you say thank you very much, and you tell them how great it is that they've done such a great job of accomplishing whatever the task was, and you cut them loose. Now, there are some really interesting reasons that works, right? Well, one is that you get to see the people who are, shall I say, idiots, who are bad volunteers.
Not idiots.
Not idiots.
Busy.
I'm sorry.
Well, everybody's busy.
You get to see the people who, for example, that won't stop talking. You get to see the people who take over a group, right, and won't give anyone else airtime. You get to see the people who don't do what they say they're going to do or don't show up. On the other hand, you get to see the people who are great, right? People you would be happy to work with any day because they do what they say they're going to do. They show up, they're a good humor and good spirit. They contribute appropriately, but don't take over. And gradually through these small ad hoc meetings, you get to pick the cream of the crop because you don't have to invite the difficult ones back. So that's a really interesting idea. These are sort of dress rehearsals, only the volunteers don't know they're being auditioned for bigger roles. Right?
Well, not only that, it's an opportunity to get lots and lots of people involved and engaged in your campaign, even if for only a short period of time.
Right.
And so you don't have to invite everybody you want onto a massive campaign committee and ask them to commit to a 3-year opportunity or relationship. You can invite people to a 2-month or 2 meeting or 3-month engagement and say, and then they are part of your extended campaign committee, but they've served for 3 months. They've played an important role. And then, they're part of the campaign committee, but they don't have to commit to 3 years. It works well on both sides of the equation, honestly.
Yeah, it really does. So there are a number of things to know about how to recruit people. And that's what we were really thinking about today, right? This is in the middle of August. Nobody's thinking about recruiting anybody yet. But there's one of the things about recruiting people is that if you ask people to help you, and where you're not asking them for help soon, but you're asking them for help in the end of September, for example, right? The chances are better they'll say yes than if you ask them for help to be on a committee starting next week, right? The chances are that, if you're asking them for some kind of a serious involvement, you should have a long horizon, because it's very hard for people then to say, well, I'm too busy, because it's like 2 months out. Who knows they're too busy in 2 months? So, and it's easier to say yes if it's not right under your nose. So that's one side. When you ask someone to help, to volunteer, you should be very specific about what it is you're asking them to do. How many meetings they're going to come to, what the task of the group is, right? What they're going to be expected to do or not to do. And the more specific you can be, the more you can have a little charge to the committee so that they know what you're asking them to do, the better. Now, the other side of this is that I once gave a training at Jerry Panis's academy, whatever he called it in Chicago, Capital Campaign Academy. And one of his guys was presenting for a while. And he said, when you ask people to volunteer, you should ask them, as I say, with a long time horizon, or you should ask them to do something tomorrow. And I always thought that was really interesting, because if people look at their calendar tomorrow and you're asking them to do something specific and they have an opening tomorrow, if you say, gee, can we meet tomorrow at 2:00? There's a reasonable chance that they'll be open at 2, right? And their calendar's not going to change between today and tomorrow. So I thought that was it's the other side of how to recruit people. Now, that's for recruiting people to something very specific tomorrow. But you should keep that in the back of your mind. If you want to have a meeting with someone, don't be embarrassed about asking them to meet with you tomorrow. They might well be able to do it.
Yeah, it can be a meeting. You can ask them to send emails. You can ask them to make thank you calls. You can ask them to e-introduce someone. So there's lots of things that can be done tomorrow. So don't hesitate to reach out and just say, you know what? Is there any chance that you have 15 minutes or 30 minutes tomorrow where you could help us out? I'd really love an introduction to so-and-so, or I'd love for you to make 2 thank you calls. So the more specific, concrete, tangible, the more likely they are to say yes. So that, Jennifer, you typed in a question into the chat box. Is starting a 6-month fundraising advisory committee similar to this idea? And I would say yes and no. I think that a 6-month fundraising advisory committee is tricky. If you have something very specific and very tangible that can be tackled or conquered in 6 months, then it makes sense. If you're just trying to time limit it, but it may really take longer, or you're not sure exactly what the engagement is, then I would say it's probably not the best idea. You want to give people a very specific task if it's going to be a short-term project, or time specific. I don't know. Andrea, what would you add anything to that, or should we keep going? And those of you that are putting questions in the chat box, please put them in the Q&A box. Sometimes they go by too quickly for us to see them.
Susan, I do see your chat saying the tactic has been used on you. I assume that's the tactic that from someone asking you to do something tomorrow. So I just one more thing I want to say, and then we're going to pivot over to your questions, which is that I, as in this fundraising business, and I hope you do this too, I'm always monitoring my own response to things, right? When people ask me to do something, how it shifts my personal response. And it always is interesting and surprising to me that when someone asks me to help in some way, it always makes me more generous. So here in New York, I like helping small arts, kind of offbeat, interesting arts organizations. It's just a sweet spot for me. And And recently, someone asked me to help her figure out how to be a better solicitor. Right? This is someone I know, and I've helped her off and on for years. It's a really interesting little organization. So I said to her, Latasha, I said, listen, I'm happy to help you, learn how to be a better solicitor. And I'll tell you how we're going to do it. I said, you're going to get in touch with me, and you're going to schedule a time to come and ask me for a gift. And I said, if you do that, I promise you, I will make a gift. So there's no risk in doing that. Right? And I said, it's on you, Latasha. And I sort of sat back and waited. Now, I've said this to a bunch of people because I think it's interesting. Of course, this woman is very capable. She called me the next day. She scheduled an appointment. She came and asked me for $500, and I gave it to her. And I thought, I gave it to her happily because I was involved, not because I felt like I was useful to her, not because she asked me for the gift. But I felt like I was giving her something more. So it's powerful to be asked to be a volunteer, right?
I think there's so many lessons in that story, Andrea. I mean, first of all, you can use your board members to practice asking on each other, but have it be a real solicitation, right? And they can provide feedback about what felt good and what didn't feel good on both sides of the equation. So I am sure you didn't just give her $500 and then send her away. You told her what she did well, what she could have done better.
Yes, exactly.
And so I think that, of course, Andrea is a pro, so she's of course going to do that, but you can use that strategy and tactic with your board members and have them both practice and really make the ask at the same time. So I just wanted to read Jennifer's follow-up question, and then there's so much good chat going on over here in the chat box. But Jennifer, you're asking who's in charge of governing these committees. Our board likes to micromanage, but they don't participate themselves.
Your board is not in charge of governing these.
So who's in charge of these committees and these groups and these ad hoc committees, Andrea? How does it work? How do they get managed?
It varies. It depends on the organization. But if we're in the capital campaign mode, and it depends on who the staff person is in the organization who really is in charge of making these things happen. And often what will happen is that a staff person will help set it up, but we'll ask someone to chair the group. Right. We'll ask a volunteer to play a leadership role in that little group just for the 3 meetings or however much they are. But the staff person will actually set them up and send reminders and do the staffing of it. So it becomes easier for the volunteers. But I would not let the board micromanage that. I mean, I would, if there is a board member who wants to run it, then that in itself is a volunteer task, which you have to define carefully. Right? I don't know who asked this question, the ED or the development director or the campaign manager has to say, this is what your role is. I need you to come to 3 meetings. I need you to chair the meetings. You and I will work on the agenda together so that we know what we're doing, right? And you will follow up. I will help draft the email afterwards. So staff supports a volunteer in leading it, or sometimes a staff person just does it and makes it happen. So there, again, you can structure that in a way that works for you, but the issue is to be super clear in advance of what it is you're asking people for and putting it in writing if you can, so that you can then hold them to it. And that's really helpful. I want to talk for one more minute about practicing, the idea of practicing. And this sort of tickles me. I mean, practicing is great. Practicing anything is great. And, even in my ripe old age, I feel like I practice most things. I still haven't mastered most anything. Mastery is not all it's cracked up to be, right? So you should be practicing. If you're going out to solicit gifts, you can be practicing on every one of them. And you can tell the people you're asking, I'm really practicing on making this work really well. I hope you'll give me feedback afterwards. And then immediately you will get them on your side. And it's not just a ploy. We really do keep learning, even me, right? In my ripe old years, it's still practicing.
And then I think it makes the whole conversation easier. If you say, listen, you're one of the first people I'm asking for this campaign. And so I hope you'll give me feedback on how I do. I may not get it perfect. And I hope you'll forgive me in advance and let me know how I do. And, the goal for both of us is to see this amazing project happen. So let's have that conversation. All right, let's look at some questions. Andrea, Susan's asking, and I don't know if I have an answer to this, but maybe somebody in the chat in the audience does. Susan's asking, do you have experience with MOUs between nonprofits and cities where the nonprofit is committing to being the private fundraising partner? If so, I'd like to know more on how to lay out the commitment, delineate the commitment. So Andrea, do you have anything to say? I'm not sure that I have anything to add to that.
I actually have worked fairly recently with 2 theater organizations that were building new theaters or trying to build new theaters in conjunction with the cities in which they were. And they developed MOUs to do that. I must say both of them have been challenging in a variety of ways. I mean, I think working with public sector partners can be challenging. You need to be sure you have some legal counsel to help with structuring that. That said, I don't think it needs to be complicated. You just need to be sure that you have run the language you've used by somebody. And everybody know that an MOU is a memorandum of understanding. I think that's what MOU stands for.
Yes. So Rick is saying in the chat that municipalities will have all the forms you want to fill out. And Amy's recommending to see if AFP has any resources. So some good suggestions.
Yeah, I mean, I think really these memoranda, it depends on when they are in the process. I mean, and often they have to reflect the specifics of what's going on in the organization. They can be quite simple or quite complicated. So I don't have any good answer for you, except to tell you that the 2 projects that I have worked on in recent years have both been challenging because the cities have not held up their end of the bargain. So word of warning, it's frustrating.
All right. If anybody has had success with this in the audience, let us know in the chat box so that you can get connected to Susan. All right. Miriam's asking, 2 of our board members who live in high-end communities want to host an event for friends, neighbors who don't already know about the organization. The guests aren't donors, but could be. The event wouldn't be an ask. Our CEO and participant families would talk about the mission. Let's see, any suggestions on how we can help those 2 board members make this event successful? So first of all, Miriam, I want to say it's great that you have 2 board members who want to participate in this way. To me, that's like the first success right off the bat, because often you don't have board members who want to volunteer and do that. I have a lot of mixed feelings about these types of events. Andrea, you want to start?
Yeah, I think what's complicated about these events and with the challenge is to figure out a way in which they actively involve the people who come and aren't just hanging out drinking, and then they don't really want to listen to someone making a presentation, right? That's the challenge of them. People come dressed in their cocktail attire or whatever. They get a drink at the door. They get some, hors d'oeuvre or whatever. Maybe they get a name tag. And then they sort of meander around, and then a board member off in the corner does a little talk. But by that time, everybody's had too much to drink and nobody listens very well. I mean, they can be very challenging. So to the extent you can find a way to actively involve people it's fun, it's a good thing. So I can tell you one thing I did years ago. I haven't thought about this in a long time. I worked here in New York for a settlement house. I was a consultant for a settlement house campaign. And they did just this. They wanted to have some events with people who didn't really know them very well. Settlement houses, they do a whole range of services, right? They provide, daycare and elder care and this kind of care and classes. And I mean, probably 6 or 7 or 8 different kinds of services happen through a settlement house. So what they did is they made little cards, decks of little cards. Each card had one of the services that the settlement house provided. And they put them together with little ribbons. And when people came in, each person got a little deck of cards, of these settlement house cards ribboned together. And they were asked to look at the card deck and to put them in the order of services they thought were most important, right? And then there were enough chairs, it was big enough, everyone was asked to sit down and say, all right, let's think, who put this first and why? Right. And by the time they went through all of the cards, what happened is that everybody who was there knew what the settlement house did. Right. But they did it based on.
Brilliant.
It was really very, very clever. And it worked because the little card decks were sweet. They weren't just Post-it notes. They were actually, printed on and a little ribbon to tie them up. And I don't know, maybe there was some kind of a special prize. If you got one of the card decks had some kind of a joker or something, and they got a special prize for something like that. There probably are many ways to do that, but it is helpful if you can find a way to make everyone who comes be an active participant in a discussion. Right. So in this particular case, somebody would think that elder care is most important. And then it's, well, who else thinks elder care is most important and why? Right. Who put childcare as their first? And, why did you pick that? So everybody got to learn a little about the people who were there just by the choices they made. Right. The idea wasn't to rank the services. It was to let people rank what was most important to them.
Right. And that's
clever idea.
That is a really clever idea. I mean, it is an engagement tool so that everybody's talking together. So it's not a boring presentation, so that it's not the host and the executive director and a client up droning on or showing a video, but you're actually engaging the participants and then saying, what you said was super interesting. I hope I could follow up and and continue the conversation. I mean, to me, that's the key. You don't want to have these unless you have a follow-up plan. And that, really having an opportunity to learn about people at this event, so sitting around in a circle and forcing the conversation, but in a really creative and fun way, to me. But if you don't have a follow-up plan of how you're going to talk to these people afterwards, then there's almost no point in having it unless you're collecting money at the event, which you said that you're not in this case. And there's probably reasons to and not to collect money during an event. All right. Let's go.
Donna, I see that you worked at Henry Street Settlement. Yes, the settlement I worked with for this was Hudson Guild, which is up in Chelsea. So you probably know it. We did a big capital campaign for them. That was fun. Henry Street is a long established settlement house, still going strong, I'm sure.
All right, let's go to Serena's question here. I'm a single team fundraising fund developer and trying to get my board excited about fundraising. I'm looking for suggestions on managing my time and providing the tools needed for our board. Is there such a thing? So slightly tangential, but I will say that Andrea has authored the best board training book on the planet. And if you don't have a copy of it yet, Andrea, I don't even have it here. It's at my other desk. Do you have it? It's called How to Train Your Board and Everyone Else to Raise Money. It's by Andrea and her brilliant partner, Andy Robinson. Oh, there it is.
There it is. You can sue it. So, but it's all blurred. I have to unblur. Well,
All right. Anyways.
I'm not going to worry about it. It has a bunch of different exercises in it. But the bigger thing I would tell you is this: the fewer the staff members, right? This is going to sound so counterintuitive, but the fewer the staff members, the fewer resources you have to work with, the bigger the gifts you need to focus on, right? Because it takes too much time to raise little gifts. So that's really what I want you to think about. You are a single team fund developer. You shouldn't be worrying about $25 and $50 gifts. You should be worrying about $1,000 and $5,000 and $10,000 gifts, right? And if you really start taking that seriously, it's actually amazing what will happen. So it takes a little courage to kind of get yourself into that frame, because it's the little organizations and the single development people who tend to be pushed down, into the weeds of little gifts. But I'll tell you, having the courage to ask for big gifts, if you get 10 gifts of over, I don't know what your numbers are, but over $5,000 each, that's going to be some serious money for you, I presume. I imagine.
So I think, of course, wouldn't it be great if all development directors could focus on those big gifts, Andrea? So to me, yes. I mean, obviously the answer is yes, but not all first gifts are going to be that size. So there does have to be a program where to bring in donors or the base for support. The question is how to balance really being able to focus on those big donors and then running some more generic bulk programs that capture the lower end donors and bring them up the ladder.
So Amy, here's the connector between that topic and volunteers. So how do you focus your attention on the large donors? You identify them and you ask them to volunteer. Yeah. Right? Those are the people you get to volunteer.
Yes.
And then you ask them to give, it may be that a first gift would be $1,000. Okay, maybe that's a big gift for you or for them as a first gift. Right? But if you get them involved, if you get them to sit down to say, help us think through something or other, help us do this, would you host something for us? Don't ask anybody to volunteer. Ask the people who have the capacity to really help you to volunteer. We didn't mention that point, Amy.
Yes, brilliant. All right. Okay. I want to stop for a second and encourage everybody to add a question into the Q&A box. If you brought a question or a topic that you want us to touch on, feel free to go ahead and enter it into the Q&A box now. All right. Mark's asking, we're an entirely volunteer-run organization planning to build a Class A public art gallery on Vancouver Island. We have acquired one property by amalgamating with another nonprofit society and have attained charitable status, but we need to have some money to acquire an adjacent property. Okay. With no employees, we are struggling to make this next steps. Any advice? Okay. We need to absorb it for a second. So the question is, how does an organization run a campaign or fundraise or grow their organization without staff? I think that's the crux of the organization, the question, with no employees.
So, it's an interesting question. And I always have a fun spot in my heart for volunteers who actually make stuff happen. And clearly you and your team does, right? You're not starting from scratch. You've actually already acquired a property. You've amalgamated. Is that the amalgamated with another nonprofit society? Do they have any staff members? Maybe is there a way you could raise enough money to actually hire someone who would be a staff member? Things get easier when you have somebody who is a staff member who sort of has or sometimes it's a volunteer who acts as a staff member, takes a salary, but then in lieu of their salary, they give the money back. Right. So, but it helps to have somebody who is in the seat, who is sort of appointed to the seat of making things happen. and reporting to the board. So part of the problem with all volunteer organizations is that leadership is often challenging. Then people don't want to step on one another's toes. So you need to solve that problem. Do you have volunteers who are willing to take that on as though they were staff? Right? I've actually run a campaign where for a Planned Parenthood years ago, where the person who became the campaign manager, she ran the whole campaign, was not only one of the largest donors to the organization, but worked full time at no salary to make that happen. She felt so strongly. So, and she behaved like a staff person, right? She wasn't really.
So I think those are the two answers. One is fundraise with the goal of hiring a staff member, unless you have a volunteer who's effectively going to function like a staff member, because you need a key point person who's essentially going to work full time on your project in order to make it happen. All right. So Kathy's asking, how can you ask for funding that will also include funding for staff? We're not funded as retirees spending many hours working. So Kathy, I want to tell you and everybody, stop feeling badly about asking for money for salaries. Your organization cannot function, cannot run unless you have the person power, the people power to do so. And so paying people to run your programs and services and operate your organization are a critical piece of your programs and services. And I don't think you should make a distinction between the two. In order to run your programs and services, it costs X amount of dollars. Will you consider contributing to that? Period. It doesn't matter if you're paying staff with that. I don't know. Would you say it any differently, Andrea?
No, I think that's exactly right. And it touches on this question of features versus benefits. Right? What you're raising money for is not really with the staff salary or the stuff you're actually buying. What you're raising money for is what benefit the organization is going to bring to people, right? Who's going to benefit from what you're doing? That's what you're raising money for. You know, no matter what your organization is, it's not about what you're spending your money on. It's about making a difference in the world. So focus on it that way. And then if you need staff to make that happen, fantastic. If you need stuff to make that happen, fantastic. But don't lose your focus on the fact that the people are giving to you because of the difference your organization makes.
All right. Jay is asking, as the Delta variant speeds up, are there good virtual touches that for the board members and staff, virtual visits like digital Starbucks gift card for virtual coffee, et cetera? All right. I'm going to throw that into the chat box. Who has creative, thoughtful, interesting ideas about how to cultivate and steward donors virtually? We've got lots of great posts, I think, on our blog about that, but I'd love to hear some ideas and things that you've done over the past year. So definitely, you want to take advantage of the virtual touches and using technology and video chat to be able to reach out. So Kathy's asking me to repeat the question. Because of COVID and the pandemic, are there good virtual touch ideas for board members and staffs for virtual visits? And Jay's suggesting virtual coffee, maybe a Starbucks gift card or something. So, you can leave a coffee mug with the logo of the organization and some biscotti and tea bags or a cookie or something on the doorstep before you have your virtual visit. But all right, good. I'll let you chat some of those in. Andrea, do you see another question you want to answer?
Let's see. Brent has asked, just starting to discuss capital campaign, putting together friends of committee who will be asked to open doors for the 2 staff people and to help our organization become known in the community where we live. Any suggestions that we should ensure is in our orientation package for this committee? Yes. So 2 things, Brent. First of all, you should have a package that really cleanly and simply describes what the campaign is about. This is not one of these situations, like those old term papers where you thought you had to write, by the pound. You thought the professors were grading you by the pound. Your job is to put together a simple folder of material that somebody can look through really easily. It should be clearly laid out on pages, so that it doesn't have to be fancy, doesn't have to be formal, but it should give them something they can look through and understand what it is you're doing. There should be a Q&A sheet about your organization, right? How long you've been in existence, how much money you raise, what your mission is. I mean, just simple things, but that should tell a clear story. So don't worry about fancy things. Be sure that somebody who doesn't know your organization can look at it and understand what it is you're doing. So that's number one. Number two, when you have your orientation for this group, for Friends of Committee, understand how easy it is to talk people to sleep. Right? That just like with my example for Hudson Guild, you should use an exercise to get people talking about the organization or about themselves, right? You should design it so they don't just come together and hear you talk and go home with a packet. That your job is to get them discussing it, is to get them, and you may put them together in groups of 2s or 3s, or you may have a round robin, or you may have a telephone. You may play the game of telephone, right, where somebody at one end starts talking about the mission of the organization, whispers it in and see what happens when it comes out the other end. There are all kinds of silly games you can play, but don't just talk at them. It won't be effective if you talk at them. You have to turn the content in some way over to them. That's very hard for people to do.
I think one of our sort of best practice rules for meetings is that everybody in the room should speak about 3 times, right? So at the beginning, go around, ask a quick question. In the middle, hopefully everybody has a chance to participate. And at the end of the meeting, everybody should share a key takeaway or a next step or something that they got out of the meeting. If you do have people come and they don't participate, there is little to no chance that they're going to show up at your next meeting or follow through. So give them ownership, give them an opportunity to participate. Your meetings, all of them, no matter what the topic, should be engaging, and give them a reason to actually show up, whether they're on Zoom or in person. I think it's really important. The other thing that I would say to Brent's question about a friends committee with the goal of having them open doors and identify new potential donors is that this really, to me, if I understand the question, comes towards the end of your campaign. This isn't the strategy to identify new donors necessarily at the beginning of the campaign, unless they're philanthropists in your community. To me, I'm sort of envisioning these people going out and asking for $500 or $1,000. Maybe I'm misreading the question, but, really, if you want to engage the biggest donors at the beginning of your campaign, they need to participate in a feasibility study. They need to be really engaged at the beginning of the campaign. This sort of Friends of Committee, to me, sounds like more of an end of campaign strategy. I guess I'd need to know more details to really say more about that, but I just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah, remember, Brent, that the capital campaign strategy is a very top-down strategy. That's the way capital campaigns work. You start by cultivating, enlisting, engaging, and soliciting the people who can give you the largest gifts. And then gradually through the campaign period, you move down the gift range chart, right, to involve more people who can give smaller gifts. And it's fairly important to try to honor that strategy. There is a good psychological reason that campaigns are set up that way. Let me go to Megan's question here. She says, following up on my description of the Hudson Guild card trick meeting. I think there are all kinds of ways to follow up with that, but one way is simply to have somebody in the room taking notes. Right. First of all, somebody should take notes about who said what. Right. Who thought that grandparents were most important? Who thought that second language classes were more important? And then somebody should be assigned to call them and say, thank you so much for coming, right? I noted that you were particularly interested in this project or that program. Can we engage you in some other way here? Would you like to come and see the program in action? Or, you can give them several things that they might want to do. So I think just call them up and have conversations and see whether they'd like to be involved. Some might not. That's okay. But they will be happy you called to follow up. Right. Okay.
All right. Jennifer's asking, they have a monthly board meeting and have been meeting over Zoom and now started back meeting in person. Should she be asking them at each board meeting to help with stewardship, with donor calls, emails, letters, or should I be focusing on asking for this help around campaigns and actual fundraising events? So to me, Jennifer, it's both yes and, right? It's not an either or proposition. At every single board meeting, you can have a stewardship opportunity or an opportunity for board members to get involved in the fundraising process. They can come 15 minutes early. You can pause the board meeting for 15 minutes in the middle and do some sort of fundraising activity. The end is probably hard. Maybe you can give people a choice whether to come early or to stay late to do something, and that will get them in the habit, in the practice of doing stewardship and participating in fundraising, so that when you do have a campaign, they're ready to help in bigger ways.
I think that's great advice. So Meredith, I've just read your question. And the end of it is it silly to get hung up on little details? And it's not silly. Let me start by saying, fundraising, while we have to think in terms of big picture stuff, it is often the details that make all the difference, right? How carefully we think through how to approach someone. And I've had clients. Actually, I have one client now where every week we have a phone call, and on those phone calls, we often spend that whole hour talking about 2 or 3 donors. And we talk in great detail about them. What do we know about them? What do they like? What don't they like? What are their patterns? Who do we know who knows them? What do we know about them? What don't we know about? We can spend that level of detailed thinking, and detailed behavior is so important. And it needs to be done in the context of broader thinking as well. So you don't want to get bogged down in details if the potential isn't big enough, right? You have to be careful that you put your time and attention where it's going to count. And when it comes to fundraising, where is it going to count? You know where it's going to count. So just be careful that you spend your time and energy wisely. Let's say that you have at your donor cultivation event that you had, 20 people at the donor cultivation event. And of those 20 people, that 5 of them are people with means and who are philanthropists in your community. So by all means, focus your attention in a very detailed way on those 5 people and ask them to do something different than the others, right? Those 5 philanthropists, you may want to call them and say, you are such a generous contributor here in this community. You really know this community well. Can we get together so I can really pick your brain and get some advice for you about how to proceed, right? But don't treat all of those people as though they were the same. They're undoubtedly not. And then use your time wisely. Amy, how would you address that?
No, I think that's exactly right. Focus on the big donors. I don't think I have anything to add to that. So listen, we're coming towards the end of our time together today. I just want to, as we get to the last few questions or not, I want to remind everybody that we are happy to speak to you specifically and individually about your campaign questions and your campaign strategy. All you need to do is go to the Capital Campaign Toolkit.com website and sign up for a strategy session. And there's a big button on the website that says Start Here. It gives you a couple of different ways to talk to us with a short, quick 20-minute meeting or a 45-minute session, or just even to watch a 5-minute video on what we do over here at the Capital Campaign Toolkit. So if we don't get to your questions in the next 2 or 3 minutes, do feel free to visit the Capital Campaign Toolkit website and sign up to talk to us individually about your campaign question. All right, we've got a couple more
remaining questions here. Yes. Any tips on responding to volunteers, board or otherwise, that say, isn't there a grant for that, instead of wanting to help and support fundraising through individuals? So, that's a chronic problem. Everybody thinks that the money is in foundations, right? That foundations are out there waiting to give you money for whatever it is you need. And it's so complicated to get people to believe that's not the case, right? That fundraising is best done from individuals. One way to do it is to show them the facts. And every year, I don't know, what's that report, Amy, that shows the breakdown of giving from individuals, corporations, and foundations?
Yes, it's called Giving USA. So if you just Google Giving USA, you will see that for years, the statistics break out that approximately 80% of donations, philanthropy in this country, come from individuals in this country, and that only 20%, it's changing a little bit, maybe a little more than 20% these days, comes from corporations and foundations combined. But all you have to do is pull up those Giving USA statistics and have a conversation around that.
And that really does lay it out for them. I mean, so that's not a bad place to start anyway. Kathy has a really good question, and I have an answer for it. Kathy says foundations don't like to support things that have a long run, right? Where you're going to hire a staff and then they're going to be on the hook for a long time. No foundations like to do that. They don't give that way. But that doesn't mean that you can't ask someone for a grant to cover the first 3 years of a staff's position in declining amounts. So the first year they would pay, $75,000, the second year, $50,000, and the third year, $25,000. And that would give you an opportunity to make up the rest of the funding from other revenue sources. And foundations may well be willing to do that. That's not uncommon, right? It's not like they're not willing to support staff. They don't give long-term gifts. So they don't want to do anything where at the end of 3 years, you have to fire someone. So you have to tell the story. You have to shape the story. You have to shape the plan in a way that it will help you solve an immediate need. And it will push you to raise additional funds so that you can keep the staff person after the foundation's gone. Right?
I think that was a perfect way to wrap up this very important discussion. I am so grateful for all of you joining us week after week. We are back through the fall and the end of the year and into the foreseeable future. And we love having you come ask your questions each and every week. So thank you so much for joining us.
And Andrea, spread the word. We're happy with more people. Let's see if we can get 10 new people to the call next week. Okay, we're going to put that in you. Now I've made you into volunteers. I've asked you to be volunteers to help us get 10 new people on the call next week.
Tell your friends, join us for Toolkit Talks. Excellent. All right. As always, great chatting with you, Andrea. Thanks for sharing your wisdom. We'll see you next week. And you,
Amy, it's always fun to do these with you, and to everyone else, we will see you next week.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for joining Amy and Andrea for today's All About Capital Campaigns. To learn more about them and their work together, go to capitalcampaigntoolkit.com.